Alright guys, I've got a game here to analyse which has been submitted by a friend and follower, Mr. Rookie Rook from Canada. So he's given me this game as an idea to have a look at, and what's interesting is that it uses an opening or opening response that I've never come across in response to the Karo-Cann. Now, I'm kind of looking for a way to play against the Karo-Cann, so this could be very interesting. So Mr. Rookie Rook is playing with the white pieces, and we've got Tim Carey playing with the black pieces, and they're both rated just under 1400. So white starts with e4, and we have c6 announcing the Karo-Cann, so d5 is going to come. And now d4 grabbing the centre, and d5. So absolutely standard Karo-Cann opening. So something I've played in a few times is knight to c3, and then if pawn takes you can recapture with a knight. I think that's pretty classical. But what Rookie Rook does is respond with something called the fantasy variation with f3. Now this is moving the forget about it pawn. So very, very interesting. Now clearly there's, whenever you move that pawn, you have to be aware of the possibility of queen to h4 coming in. So and also the knight can't now go to f3, covering those two squares. So it's interesting. So we're going to be opening up the king side of the board. But right now, because the e pawn hasn't moved with the Karo-Cann, obviously it's c and d that move on the first couple of moves. So the queen can't get out just now, so maybe this is a workable response. Now d captures on e4 and f captures on e4, so this is looking pretty good. So white now has two central pawns, whereas black only has the one central pawn that also hasn't yet advanced. On the downside, look at this, king is kind of out in the open, so that king needs to scuttle away to safety as quickly as possible. Black now plays e6, which does open up a path for the queen to come out, and now knight to f3 is possible because the pawn's captured there on e4. So this is a very, very important move that you see it in the king's gambit, for example, to stop the queen from coming down. I see it in the Vienna gambit when the f pawn has disappeared, and if at any point that this diagonal opens up, I know that I need to play f3, knight to f3, to cover these two squares, right? But particularly h4. So this is kind of looking okay. I mean, this looks healthy for white at this point. Now knight comes out to f6. It's now attacking e4, which is undefended. So white responds by playing the bishop to d3. Knight to c3 is also an idea. And now c5, attacking this pawn. So c3 is now played, defending the pawn, and black takes and white takes. So white's nice centre is maintained. This is still looking good. Bishop to d7 now. I don't really see the point of that move. I'd have thought that bringing the knight out first, maybe also bringing this bishop out at some point, you could even come out with check and preparing to castle, might be moving black along in his plans a little bit more. But because you see, the thing is, I can't see black wanting to castle queenside now, so but he's definitely going to want to castle kingside. So I would probably, something I'm looking at a bit more at the moment is remembering to castle earlier. There are so many games that I see that I'm going through a lot of old games, analysing a lot of old games at the moment. Any time that I see that my opponent hasn't castled quickly enough, it's so common that leaves a target to attack. You can start to try and bust open the middle of the board. You can start an attack, and for me, I'm being very conscious at the moment of maybe castling earlier in my development than leaving it till the end of my development. So white now castles kingside, which I think is a very, very good idea. Give the king some protection with these pawns. And the other nice thing is that the RF pawn has moved over to the E file, so we have a semi-open file here for the rook. So I'm liking this. I'm liking this so far. Queen comes out to b6, so it's attacking this pawn, which is defended by the knight, and this pawn, which is defended once by the dark squared bishop. And another kind of sensible prophylactic move, just moving the king over to h1, getting it off of this diagonal where the queen's looking. And now the knight is developed. Remember, the black still hasn't castled. And white thought for a minute and a half over this move. So obviously with this knight coming out here, there are now two attackers on against that pawn, and previously only the one defender. Now, bishop to e3 wasn't really possible because the bishop's defending this pawn as well. That would be a nice natural move to play, possibly then reinforce the bishop, protect it, and think about winning material with a discovered attack. Discovered double attack might be good. But that's not possible right now because white doesn't want to surrender this pawn, and so what we have is a discovered defense by simply moving the light squared bishop out of the way, which then generates a second defender against the pawn on d4. Another idea potentially could have been to advance this pawn. The king, now that the king's out of the way there, could have advanced the pawn, and if pawn takes, and then we've opened up the king a bit, and we have an isolated pawn position for black. So that might have been an idea. Another idea as well could have been to maybe push e5, but either of these would have come with the threat of capturing a knight, so would have been forcing black to respond and maybe forgetting about his ideas of trying to grab a pawn in the middle of the board. So anyway, bishop comes back, and now, whoa, what the hey? Tim Kerry, I'm not sure that I approve of your castling strategy there, my friend. So Tim has castled queenside and put his king right on a semi-open file. Okay. Well, let's trust that Tim knows what he's doing, because I don't. Alright, so now rookie rook develops his knight. So we're on move 12 now, and still haven't completed development, but I think that white looks in a solid position. I'm just still reeling at black's decision to castle long. Okay, so now black, rather than moving his bishop, which he really ought to be thinking about to connect his rooks together and complete development, comes in with an attack against the c2 bishop, and the bishop moves. Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced about this move. I think one thing I like is that just getting the bishop off the c-file is good, because look at this. I mean, hang on, it's not even a semi-open file. He's put his king on a completely open file. Excuse me. Right? So if these pieces move, wow, that king is wide open. Okay, so is this the best place to move the bishop? Maybe it is. I mean, if he doesn't want to lose it, he can't. If black's really keen on grabbing that bishop, then either of these squares isn't available, and you really don't want to move it back to b1. So yeah, I guess b3 is the only realistic option if you absolutely want to keep it on the board, which is a good idea. We've got a lovely open board, some missing pawns, a lot of space around the king here. It is looking like a good game for a bishop. Okay, so now we have bishop to c6. It's adding a second attacker against this pawn. So I think rook to e1 would make sense, or even maybe considering a push. This is interesting. So what white does is develop the bishop. It's now just about completed development, with an attack on this knight, pinning the knight to the rook. So I think, yeah, so because the knight is one of the attackers against this pawn, if we had, for example, bishop takes, knight takes, if knight takes, then black is going to go down the exchange, so white would be slightly better in that instance. Finally, black now decides to develop his bishop, and it looks like it might be a blunder, but this pawn is pinned by the rook to the queen. So pawn cannot capture. However, you have to bear in mind that if pawn captures, right, it's now attacking the queen. So this is something that I would stop and calculate, and white actually does spend over a minute on his next move. So pawn takes, rook takes, queen. Then you might have pawn takes queen, and this rook is either going to have to get out of dodge or just swap itself off. So it seems to me as though white would win a bishop in that kind of exchange. Yeah? Or you got pawn takes and something else happens and then you get the queen out of the way. So a bit of an odd move. So white chooses to grab the knight initially, and pawn recaptures. Maybe, I don't know if what white's reasoning for that was, because what he has done is opened up the g file, which could be occupied by a rook, not there, and maybe endanger his king, so I'm not entirely sure about that one. But now white grabs the bishop, which I probably would have done on the previous go, and we have queen takes. So now the queen has to move out the way. This is good. So now, very simply, because of this, white is just up a piece. With this move, I can see what black was thinking. Black's thinking you can't capture, but missed the fact that the capture comes with an attack on the queen. So he has actually blundered his bishop, right? And that is pretty much the end of the game. So we have an exchange there. Queen moves out of the way, and now we're proposing an exchange of bishops. So now white wants to simplify. He's two bishops up for a pawn. Sorry, he's a bishop up for a pawn. Black attacks the queen. Now we have a proposal of queen trade. So white is clearly got his mind set on simplification. There's no way that black can now avoid both of these trades because there's a lot of tension now. So we have queen takes, rook takes, knight comes in to attack the rook, rook to d2, knight to f2 check isn't possible because rook can capture, and we have bishop takes bishop. So an issue here for black is, I don't know why black isn't now initiating exchanges, because he's a full knight down at this point for a pawn. This knight is now pinned against that rook, so it's really not in black's interest to be swapping off material at this point. But white knows what he wants to do. Okay, king moves away, king starts to come into the centre of the board, discovery against the rook. The rook is actually protected, defended by this knight, so that's okay. So white's thinking, you can take my rook, I'm not bothered. Rook moves across. Bit of a funny move there. I think a much better idea would probably be for black here to double up his rooks, because then that comes with the threat of rook takes, and if knight takes, you've got the second rook comes in, so winning a piece and regaining equality in the game. But rook to c8, not brilliant, and now white does exactly what I'm thinking, which is to double up on an open file. All very good and sensible chess. Pawn to e5, knight comes in with a fork on black's knight and the undefended pawn. So we have captures, pawn attacks knight, knight just moves out of the way. So we've got, yeah, these doubled pawns here are starting to look pretty awkward. Rook comes across to stop the pawn's advance, and it's defended by the other rook. Knight comes in with a second attack against the pawn, and we grab the pawn. Now he doubles up, but now the king can come in. You really want to be thinking about activating your king, using it for defending important squares at this point in the game. But this is really just a winning position now for white. Now the rooks double up on the second rank, and this is absolutely fine. White can just move the knight out of the way now. This is not a good idea to be swapping off material at this point. Pawn moves forward where it's defended by the knight. Knight's attacked. Now the knight can now move to where it can recapture this pawn. Rook takes, knight takes pawn, and this is looking very, very bad now for black. Pawn's defended by the rook, so that's alright. And there are a few more moves. Swaps off. But at this point in time, with the pawns on both sides of the board and a knight here, I can't see white managing to lose this game. Although, you know, if you followed my last "What a Bloody Idiot" video, I could probably find a way to lose if I really put my mind to it. Okay, a little bit more manoeuvring, and then I assume that black resigns or abandons the game. But it's definitely a clear winning position for white. So, key things in the game. I'm curious about this fantasy variation opening, and I think I may have to try it myself against the Karo-Cann, but I might look into it a little bit further. It definitely merits investigation. And the other key point, let's just whiz forward, was this blunder with the bishop. This move here, bringing the bishop out here, looked clever, but really hadn't been thought through. So with 13 minutes still on your clock, yeah, I think it was a scrappy game from black's perspective. I think it was solidly played by white. So yeah, and it all comes down to something like this. The game really just fell away from black at this point. Very dubious castling idea to castle long when he's got all three pawns here and the defensive knight already lined up on that side. I would definitely have been thinking about castling on the king side for black. But yeah, good win and interesting response to the Karo-Cann that I would definitely like to investigate. So thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.